Hello, I'm Thomas from Medieval Review, and this is part 3 of my video series on weapon dynamics. In the previous videos, we took a look at the dynamic properties of a sword and spoke about what they mean for the general use and utilization of a weapon such as this Albion Lichtenauer that is sitting right here in front of me. We also took a look at how to take measurements of these properties, some of them just basic physical properties and some of them more dynamic properties, and enter this into the weapon dynamic calculator created by Vincent Le Chevalier with the assistance of Peter Johnsson. Now this tool gives a lot of very useful information, both mathematically and also visually. Now this is called an agility chart, and while in and of itself it is completely sufficient to actually describe in a very generalized manner the dynamic properties of a sword, it's helpful to kind of clean that up a bit and make it just a little bit more presentable. So we're going to shift away from the scientific aspect of taking measurements and move more into the artistic side to give visual flair to the agility chart. Once we have the agility graph created in the weapon dynamics calculator, we can now take this agility graph and spruce it up a bit, make it look really beautiful and presentable, much like we see in the book, The Sword, Form, and Thought. And so the way we're going to do this is we're just going to save the vector drawing. This saves as a .svg. And then we're going to open this image along with what's basically a base file that I use in a program called Inkscape. Now, Inkscape is a free vector image editor. It's a really wonderful tool, and it has very nice, almost Photoshop-like usability. So I'm just going to drag this window out of the way so you can see what this tool looks like. Now, what I have here in this image is essentially a base working document, and I will actually share this document as you see right now. I will share this document published on the web so you can use it as a starting point, and that way you don't have to do a lot of the work that I did to actually be prepared to do these kind of finished charts. Over here in this main kind of gray page area, this is actually an 8x11 sheet of paper sized page, and the gray background is just so it can match the reference image that I have on the right here from The Sword, Form, and Thought. This way when I do an image save, it saves it with the gray background. That's why that's there. You can move it out of the way or leave it. It's really up to you. I have this reference image mostly for the purposes of capturing the color that we need. So there's slightly different color variations in the different parts. As you can see, there's this kind of this almost like purplish outline. I didn't do that on the mass curve. I ended up just using a black outline. I think it pops a little bit better, but you can match the colors as you see fit. That's why I have this reference image there. And finally, for the purposes of what we're going to be working on and for the purposes of demonstration, I of course have the Lichtenauer longsword right here, and I have a basic vector image that I created of it. Now I'm going to basically at least recreate part of this vector image so you can see how I do it, but you need a good reference image, straight shot on of the sword. You can either take this yourself, or thankfully for many swords online, it's actually just available. So you can just go download an image of it and use it as a reference image. And that's what we're going to actually start off with. We're just going to take this reference image and draw over it, trace around it, and make a nice little vector image kind of like this one. Now, one thing I will note is I'm going to try to avoid, for the purposes of demonstration, using hotkeys. There is one that I'm going to cheat and use a lot, so if you hear me clicking on a keyboard a lot, it's either going to be me hitting page up or page down. The reason for that is everything is layered. Everything sits on top of another object. And so if I have this image of sword, you see it hides behind everything. But if I select it and I hit page up, it can actually come to the top of everything, but it takes a bunch of me hitting page up. I can also move it straight to the top with like object raise to top, lower to bottom, right? So I can move it to the very top or move it to the very bottom using home or end, just depending on where I actually want it to sit in the overall image. It can matter because, as you can see in my reference image here, the sword outline itself actually sits above the cone and oval, but it sits below pretty much everything else, and it will do the same thing when we're done. But zooming in here on the profile image of this longsword, what I basically do is I use this Bezier curve pen tool, and I basically just choose a starting point. Now, I try to find anywhere there's kind of defining feature outline. I try to work around that. So we're just going to start right here at the pommel, and I'm going to select right about here on the image to act as a starting point, and I'm just going to trace it out. And you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. You try to trace out as best as possible, matching the silhouette of the sword more than anything, and you'll have the ability to go back and refine your image a bit, which is what I will certainly be doing here in just a moment. And once you've connected the dots around, it creates this nice solid line around, and I'll do the same thing for the handle here. Thankfully the handle is mostly straight, so I'll just do a straight shot over, down, and back again. Okay, and I'll wrap this up by also just as quickly as possible doing the cross guard. And of course I would just continue this exact same process for the blade itself until I've drawn everything in a way that I'm actually essentially happy with. And I'm not going to do this entire sword because it would honestly be boring for the purposes of a video, but you can get the gist of what I'm doing here. So once I've connected all these rough pieces together, I can go back and I can actually edit individual points using this tool, the Edit Paths by Nodes. When you click on any particular outline object, it'll actually show you the nodes. You can move them around or edit them however you see fit. You also have the ability to put curves on things. So obviously I don't want this to just be a bunch of really jagged lines everywhere. So I can actually choose as many nodes as I want. I can actually do that as a selection. And I can say, look, I'm just going to turn those into curved lines. And then as I select them, I can actually adjust the curves and points as I see fit to actually give curvature to everything. Makes it really easy. And of course, this is very ugly looking. I would refine it, obviously. But it's a very easy way of making adjustments to get a nice look to everything. If I feel like there's any one part that really needs a lot of work, I can always go back and do things. You also have the ability to delete specific nodes, so if I feel like there's too many nodes in one spot, I can just select it and hit delete. Very easy to do. You can also add in nodes. There's a lot of functionality that makes this a very powerful editor. The next thing to do once I'm comfortable with where I have all of my points, which I'm going to make some minor adjustments here, is to then just fill in this this vector drawing with a bit of color. I'm matching essentially what I have over here in my reference drawing, so I can have the colors the same. Like I said, just like Photoshop, I use an eyedropper tool that'll actually grab the color that I need, and then I can use a paint tool to very quickly just fill in the spots I need. It also helps if you select the object. It's important to actually select the object you're going to fill in. And I should actually probably move this reference image out of the way. That's the other thing you need to do. One of the reasons this program has some odd things that it does. And as you can see, filling it in, it actually has a couple of issues. One of which is it likes to not fill in exactly on the edges. Now you can actually solve this pretty much the same way. You can actually just adjust curves, fill it in, put it behind the black line, and then like I said, just using page up or page down, you can actually set it behind. There's a lot of little tricks you can do to actually make this image get exactly where you want it to be. But it's actually pretty easy to do. And so once you've got it all filled in and you've drawn the entire thing, it won't look too different than what I have, say, down here. Now obviously the more complex the sword, the more complex the drawing. I've done something really basic here, but it's just so you can have a nice visual representation of the longsword, a rough visual kind of guideline, and you can be as exacting as you want to be. Obviously, if you look at what was done in the book The Sword, Form and Thought, as you can see, they got super detailed. It's kind of hard to tell actually in this drawing because of the quality of the resolution, but they actually got every single little nick and imperfection on the edge of the blade, because a lot of these were museum originals that were obviously not in the most pristine condition. In very good condition, but obviously the blades might be damaged. And so these were very exacting measurements they used. I'm being less exacting right now. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these objects I just created, get them out of the way. We don't need them. We have this nice object down here. When you create a bunch of smaller objects, you can of course select them and group them together so they become one solid object. Now, the file that I downloaded from the Weapons Dynamic computer, I can just drag that in as a .svg file and bring it straight into this program editor, and here it is. Very, very easy to do. And I can just kind of bring this up here, overlaying this gray section, and what I actually do is I adjust all of my individual items to match this image, and so I'll make some adjustments as well for the final product here, but I'm just going to move this all the way back. I can hold down page down, bring it up one. Okay, so now it's behind everything, and what I'll do is I'll just take the individual components that I need and I'll adjust them to where they need to be. So another good way to do this is actually drop the opacity of the thing that you're working on so you can tell what the differences are. So I'm going to drop that opacity down a bit. And so here we go. So I have my various objects, my ovals, etc. And I'm just going to adjust them over everything on this drawing to get it exactly how I want it. So at this point, I'll probably actually pretty much just speed up the video for the sake of time so you can actually see that I am actually moving objects around. But I will actually note that one of the things that is important to note is that there is differences in what's essentially the symbols being used between the book, the sword, form of thought, which I like to use, and what is generated on the Weapons Dynamic calculator. The big thing to note is that this white line here represents the point of the cross guard, and so that's where I'm actually going to line everything up. I'm just going to take this total vector image and I'm going to just align that cross guard right over that white line and align it as best I can with everything else. And from this point on, I'm just going to begin moving items around so you can see where it will all go. Alright, I'm going to take a moment to actually pause right here to make a couple of notes of what I've just done, because there are some issues. So with these curves, I basically move them to the correct size and edit the individual points to meet the curve. One of the things to note with the way this tool works is whenever you stretch out an image, unfortunately stretches all the component parts. So sometimes you need to actually edit the individual elements. It can be quite difficult to actually get it to select what you want sometimes. So a good way to do this is just to ungroup for the time being. What that allows you to do, if it'll allow me to ungroup, is to select the individual components and edit those as you see fit. Boy, it's not wanting to ungroup though. There we go. You have to keep ungrouping apparently. There we go. So now I can edit these individual components, such as this long line. And the way it is in the sword form of thought, again, the reason for that reference image is so you can see this. These lines go all the way down through the curve. So again, you basically end up with the line that shows the vibration node. You have a line for the location of the crossguard, a line for the center of mass, and then you have a line for the vibration node in the blade. And again, because everything gets modified when I stretch this out, well, it changes the width here in my stroke style. So I can reduce that back to 1, and I'm going to do that with all of these items because it will actually adjust it for me, and I'm usually not very happy when it does that. And so all these items I always try to keep just a width of 1 across the board on everything. And the same thing is true of these arrowheads. I try to keep them the rough size that I need to so I can move them around. You'll notice that the arrowheads point to the point on the curve, and then they have a dashed line up to the vibration node area in general. And so that's again what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to make sure that I have this arrowhead coming down to right on the curve, and I will have this line coming right down to that, and the following line, dashed line right there. And now, of course, again, I have to go back and make edits to all the widths. So again, I will speed up the video at this point and continue doing that exact process for all these different objects. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to move all of this stuff over some so I have a little bit of space. And then the last couple things I have to edit is actually the information down here. Now these pieces of information line up with two different items. We have the weight for the center of mass, and if I reference the image that I have of, or sorry, the data that I have from the weapons dynamic calculator and the measurements I took, I know the weight of the Lichtenauer is right at 1614 grams. And then this other bit is actually going to come from the calculated information from the weapons dynamic computer, which is the it's the percentage of the the effective mass at the blade node. And so what I got as a measurement from that was 374.86 grams. And I usually just round that up, 375 in that case, rounding up. And then I always do the 2 decimal places in the percentage, which is 23.23. And so what this means, again, is that essentially if I were, the amount of mass that's required to displace, again, at that vibration node is roughly 23% of the overall mass of the sword. So once I have all this stuff placed, now I'm going to then just finally move this object over onto the drawing, and I'm going to have to scale it. Now you want to be careful when you're scaling because, of course, you can scale it to be very flat. If you hold down Control, it'll actually scale to scale to proportions. And so really the way I do this, I just get the tip right there on the graph, and I should be able to just hold down Control and adjust to roughly the size of the overall drawing. Do a little bit more of an adjustment here. Now, it would appear that the reference drawing I have is not exactly perfect, which is a little bit unfortunate, but we'll just kind of deal with it. I can, of course, adjust my drawing a bit to make sure that it fits properly, like I really expect it to. And if I feel like there's any point that I really need to actually pull out specific components, I can do so by just selecting them individually, like so. Drawing them out a bit. Alright, so there you go. That's a rough drawing of the dynamics chart. Now I can actually pull the larger drawing that I had, the SVG, the vector image drawing. I can actually pull that out of all this now. one way to do that is to select a portion of it that you can still see. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that's hanging over it, but like this dotted line right here is actually part of that drawing, so I can actually pull that out. And now I have that out of the way. I have what's almost the completely done drawing. Now the last bit I need to do is actually pull these symbols up a bit, or much easier is just to take that entire sword, and again I'm just going to use page down until all the correct pieces are on top like I need it to be. And so now you see all these objects are roughly where they are supposed to be. Obviously, like I noted, my drawing is a little bit off on some of this, and I always try to adjust things that aren't supposed to be on the blade according to my reference image. I always pull them off a bit to where they do need to be. Specifically, the items that are that overlay with arrows pointing down or in should be on the outside of the blade. And you can actually see that in this reference image. Everything is behind or above. The only items that sit on top are the hilt pivot points. And so, of course, again, I can just hit page down to put things behind. And I do actually try to draw them out a bit so they do actually look like they are supposed to. And move them up like so. And there you go. And so there we go. That is essentially my finished drawing for the agility graph. Now, again, one thing to note is that, again, as I noted, that because the symbols don't always match up, you have to figure out exactly what you're matching to. And what I did was, if I bring this back over, and I'm actually going to bring this to the top, so I'm going to raise it all the way to the top, and I'm going to have its opacity at about 50% so I can overlay it fairly easily. But what you can actually see here is I use, of course, the vertical lines on the hilt to match up with my two pivot points where I was gripping by. And then the reference node that I ended up using, as I noted in the previous video, it seemed like my theoretical pivot point on the blade for my secondary point was more accurate than my measured one, and that really bore out in the video. So I actually lined up with that, but my measured pivot point is what I used for the other one. It's right about here. And then, of course, I have my vibration node on the blade lining up. And so it's pretty easy to line these things up. But obviously, as I did note before, a lot of the information that is present in the newer agility chart generation tool, the weapon dynamic calculator, it has a lot more information in it than the sword form and thought did, but I think the simplified view works pretty well. And of course, I'm going to make, again, some adjustments for length here. So I want those arrows to be off of the hilt, and I will actually do that adjustment as individual items because, again, it likes to stretch things in ways that it shouldn't. Well, I might do that later because that's nitpicking. That's just kind of my own personal preference. So anyway, and so I have all these things lined up where they need to roughly be, and there we go. That is the finished agility chart. This is then basically publishable, usable, and a very nice visual indication of just how well these things work. And you can make adjustments. Like obviously, I think at this point, text size needs to be increased a good bit to match. Maybe it is even worth, in this case, emboldening some of these lines to be a little bit darker to match things a little bit better. But yeah, that's it. Entirely done at this point. I'm very happy with the way it worked in general. Of course, I will note that I definitely made some errors in taking some of the measurements. There is actually a neat little way of kind of verifying that you've gotten your measurements correctly, and that is to create a couple of circles. And what I'm going to do with these circles is I'm going to place them over the measured pivot points. I'm going to scale them properly, like so. And so you can see that I've put one edge of the circle there and the other one there. And this is a trick that I actually learned from Vincent himself as I was working through this process. If you match these circles up with their respective nodes properly, then you can actually essentially draw what is a straight line from where they intersect to the center of mass, and it should match up. As you can see, this matches up extremely well, so that gives me a very good high confidence in the ultimate drawing that I came up with. However, if I were to have decided to go with my measured points, it wouldn't line up so well. So I'm moving this this drawing back over real quick to show you just how wrong that could be. I'm going to move this page up again so you can see it. I'm going to line it up roughly. Okay, so if I were to move this circle now in to that secondary measurement point, you can see how far off I am now from the center of mass line with these two circles. So obviously this theoretical line was a much better choice because it lines up a lot better. So that's a good way of actually spot checking your work. If something is really off, those lines don't quite match, something might be wrong. Now, I can't say that I know that this will work 100% of the time, but it should work a vast majority of the time on most swords, and so it's a good way to spot check. I'm going to go ahead and delete those. I'm going to go ahead and move this chart back off, and I'll go ahead and actually just delete that, because now I have my finalized nice chart that looks really quite similar to that it was published in the book, The Sword, Form, and Thought. You can see the curve is a little bit different, a little bit more extreme. Very interesting to kind of just see how it works over the length of the sword and all of that. You can obviously make adjustments as you see fit, but I really think that this is a good way to get a nice final product that looks a little bit better when you compare it to what the tool produces. Because what the tool produces is perfectly valid. It works very well, but I do feel like it could be just a little bit better, a little bit nicer for the purposes of visual indication. So there you go. That is my process for generating the nice finalized version of the agility charts. And again, of course, I will be publishing this Inkscape document online so you can download it and have all these symbols ready to go, so you don't have to go back through and recreate all of them. It's really a hassle to do so. But when all is said and done, you should have a very nice chart and something really fantastic to be able to publish online and share your sword dynamics results with the world. We have now gone through the entire process of creating a beautiful agility chart for this sword that can be shared with the entire sword community. And while this process can be repeated again and again for pretty much every sword that's out there, there is one thing that we have not yet discussed. It's a larger question dealing with sword dynamics, and that is, what do we do with this information? I mean, it might seem like a simple problem to solve. We use this to just simply compare swords, right? But it's not really that simple. You see, this isn't going to solve the age-old problem of which sword is better, the katana or the longsword. It just isn't going to work. In fact, all it's really going to do is highlight the differences between the weapons that we already knew were there. In my opinion, sword dynamics really only helps to bring commonality to a kind of language that we've had a hard time expressing before. How a sword feels in the hands, what we think it's good at. But it doesn't really necessarily bear one out as being more superior. So what good is all this? What does this provide us as a sword community? What does it do for us as the consumer of swords as a product? What does it do for the manufacturer who's trying to sell swords to us? What does it do for the designer of swords as they are trying to perfect their craft? See, this isn't an easy question to answer. Thankfully, you don't have to hear me try to answer it. In the next video, I'm going to sit down with Peter Johnsson, world-renowned swordsmith, and we're going to talk about this exact aspect of sword dynamics. What does it all mean? See you next time. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also check out Medieval Review on Patreon.